At the same time, what we are also learning is that the Strait of Hormuz has been shut. The Iranian Navy.
Well, it only took a few hours, but the long-awaited ceasefire in Iran is already on shaky ground. Last night, the United States, Israel, and
Strait of Hormuz off Iran, where new attacks are now sending oil prices on another wild ride today.
Persian Gulf, 85 kilometers south of Bandar Abbas, 3:30 in the morning. 96 U.S. Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6 were positioned on the decks of 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers enforcing the U.S. blockade. Nearby on the Iranian coast, 410 Iranian forces prepared 15 ballistic missile launchers to break the U.S. blockade. The U.S. Navy had 7 minutes to launch a massive counterattack. The Strait of Hormuz was a critical choke point for global oil shipments. The U.S. Navy blockade stopped Iranian ships from passing. Iranian forces believed their mobile ballistic missile launchers were hidden and protected by air defense systems. They thought the U.S. Navy would not risk a fast counterattack so close to their shore. The U.S. Navy had a clear plan ready. The U.S. Navy forces divided into Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta elements with specific assignments. Alpha element would use carrier jets to destroy air defense systems. Bravo element would use destroyers to launch cruise missiles at the launch sites. Charlie element would jam Iranian radars and communications. Delta element would insert the U.S. Navy SEALs by helicopter to seize the main command center. At 3:37 in the morning, the Iranian forces launched the 15 ballistic missiles toward the U.S. Navy ships. The U.S. Navy radar picked up the launches immediately. The massive counterattack started 7 minutes later at 3:44 in the morning. The U.S. Navy ships fired SM-6 missiles to intercept the incoming ballistic missiles. 4 SM-6 missiles hit their targets in the air. The remaining Iranian missiles were taken out by the Phalanx CAWS on the destroyers. The U.S. Navy forces attacked from multiple directions at once. Iranian forces on the coast were confused. Their commanders shouted orders, but the attacks came too fast. Alpha element fighter jets took off from the carrier and flew toward the Iranian coast. They spotted the ZU-23-2 anti-aircraft guns. The pilots fired AGM-114 Hellfire missiles. The missiles hit the guns exploded. Iranian forces ran from the position. The jets circled for a second pass. They dropped GBU-31 JDAM bombs on the radar sites. The radar sites were destroyed. Bravo element destroyers launched BGM-109 Tomahawk missiles at the mobile launchers. The missiles flew low over the water. They hit the first 3 launchers. The launchers exploded in large fireballs. Iranian forces tried to move the other launchers but had no time. At 3:52, the first Iranian launchers were destroyed. Iranian forces fired back with RPG-7 rockets at the jets. The rockets missed. The Iranian forces used DSHK heavy machine guns from the coast. The bullets did not reach the jets. The U.S. Navy forces kept the pressure on. Charlie element started jamming the Iranian radars. The Iranian forces lost contact with their command center. They could not call for help. The jamming made their air defense systems blind. Delta element helicopters flew in low over the water. The U.S. Navy SEALs prepared to fast rope down near the command center. The U.S. Navy SEALs fast roped to the ground. They moved toward the bunker entrance. They used M4 SOP-Mod 2 rifles to take out the first guards. The guards fell quickly. A breacher placed a shaped charge on the locked door. The breacher detonated the charge. The door blew inward. Well, the U.S. Navy SEALs moved through the opening. At 4:05, the U.S. Navy SEALs cleared the first corridor. Iranian forces inside used AK-74 rifles to fight back. The U.S. Navy SEALs used Mk-48 Mod 0 machine guns to suppress the fire. The Iranian forces fell back to the second room. The U.S. Navy SEALs threw grenades to clear the room. The grenades exploded. The resistance was broken in that area. Bravo element continued the missile strikes. They fired AGM-84 Harpoon missiles at Iranian patrol boats that tried to approach. The boats sank in minutes. The U.S. Navy forces destroyed 2 patrol boats. The sea around the coast was clear of Iranian vessels. The U.S. Navy strike was coordinated. The airstrikes and missile launches happened at the same time. The Iranian forces could not respond effectively. The blockade stayed intact as the attack went on. At 4:18, the Delta Element U.S. Navy SEALs reached the main command room. They used C4 to destroy the radio equipment. The equipment was destroyed. Iranian forces tried to counter with PKM machine guns. The U.S. Navy SEALs used M24OB machine guns to return fire. The Iranian forces were pinned down. The U.S. Navy SEALs advanced and captured the room. Charlie Element kept the jamming active. Iranian reinforcements could not get clear orders. The reinforcements moved slowly. They arrived without full support. The U.S. Navy forces used AIM-9X Sidewinder missiles to take out 2 Iranian helicopters that tried to help the defense. The helicopters were shot down. The U.S. Navy forces had taken control of the main areas. The remaining Iranian launchers were exposed. Alpha Element jets made another pass. They used AGM-114 Hellfire missiles to destroy the last launchers. The launchers were gone. At 4:30, the last anti-aircraft position was destroyed. The U.S. Navy forces had completed the main part of the counterattack. The Iranian forces were retreating from the coast. The U.S. Navy kept watch from the sea and the air. The main command center was now under U.S. Navy control. The Delta Element U.S. Navy SEALs searched the rooms. They found maps and codes. The U.S. Navy SEALs destroyed the remaining computers with thermite. The computers melted. The command center was no longer usable. Bravo Element fired one more round of BGM-109 Tomahawk missiles to make sure all launch sites were gone. The missiles hit their targets. No launchers remained. Alpha Element jets refueled in the air and returned for another strike. They spotted more Iranian forces moving along the coast road. The pilots fired additional AGM-114 Hellfire missiles. The missiles struck the moving trucks. The trucks stopped and burned. Iranian forces jumped out and ran for cover. The jets stayed overhead to watch the area. Bravo Element destroyers adjusted position for better angles. They launched a fresh volley of BGM-109 Tomahawk missiles at secondary supply depots. The missiles struck the depots. Fuel tanks exploded. Smoke rose high into the sky. Iranian forces lost their spare parts and fuel for any quick repair. At 4:45, the Iranian forces tried to set up a new defense line on a nearby hill. They brought PKM machine guns and RPG-7 launchers. The U.S. Navy SEALs from Delta Element spotted the position from their bunker. The U.S. Navy SEALs used Mk-11 Mod 0 sniper rifles to take out the gunners. The gunners fell. The defense line fell apart in seconds. Charlie Element increased the jamming power on all frequencies. The Iranian forces could not use their radios at all. They sent runners with messages instead. The runners were slow and exposed. The U.S. Navy forces used the delay to tighten their control. Delta Element U.S. Navy SEALs moved to the next bunker section. They encountered a heavy barricade. A breacher placed a linear charge on the barricade. The charge detonated. The barricade cleared. The U.S. Navy SEALs moved forward and used Mk-18 CQBR rifles to clear the next room. The Iranian forces in the room fired back with AK-74 rifles. The U.S. Navy SEALs answered with M249 SAW fire. The Iranian forces dropped their weapons. The room was cleared. At 5 o'clock, the U.S. Navy forces had destroyed 12 of the 15 ballistic missile launchers. The remaining 3 were hidden in a narrow valley. Alpha element jets flew into the valley low and fast. They used M120 AMRAAM missiles to clear the path. The jets then dropped more GBU-31 JDAM bombs. The remaining launchers were destroyed in the blasts. The U.S. Navy SEALs from Delta Element found the last group of Iranian forces hiding in a side tunnel. The U.S. Navy SEALs used the Carl Gustav M3 recoilless rifle to take out a machine gun position at the tunnel entrance. The position was destroyed. The Iranian forces surrendered without further fight. Bravo Element fired one final set of AGM-84 Harpoon missiles at two Iranian coastal radar trucks that tried to restart. The trucks were hit and flipped over. The radar trucks stopped working completely. The U.S. Navy forces coordinated every strike from the ships and the air. The jamming from Charlie Element kept the Iranian forces blind the whole time. The Iranian forces could not bring in any air support or heavy reinforcements. The U.S. Navy kept the full advantage from start to finish. At 5:15, the last pockets of Iranian forces stopped fighting. The U.S. Navy SEALs secured the entire command area. They collected the remaining documents and hard drives. The U.S. Navy SEALs planted more thermite charges on all electronics. The charges burned hot and destroyed everything inside. Alpha Element jets made one final sweep over the coast. They confirmed no launchers remained intact. The pilots reported all targets eliminated to the carrier. The U.S. Navy forces had achieved every part of the plan. The counterattack was complete and the blockade stayed fully in place. The objective was reached as the last launcher was destroyed. The final Iranian forces' resistance was crushed as the U.S. Navy SEALs cleared the last bunker. The U.S. Navy captured 40 Iranian forces and destroyed the remaining equipment. The U.S. Navy forces began their extraction. The helicopters picked up the U.S. Navy SEALs from the coast. The jets returned to the carrier. The destroyers stayed in position to watch the area. The U.S. Navy ships and aircraft headed back to their stations in the Persian Gulf. Iranian reinforcements arrived 25 minutes later, but found only destroyed sites. The U.S. Navy suffered 0 killed and 8 wounded. The Iranian forces had 280 killed, 90 wounded, and 40 captured. The U.S. Navy destroyed facilities and equipment worth $85 million, including the 15 ballistic missile launchers in the command center. Iran believed their ballistic missiles could break the U.S. blockade without any risk. What actually happened was a massive counterattack by the U.S. Navy that destroyed their entire launch capability in less than 1 hour. Sometimes the strongest defense is not enough when the U.S. Navy decides it needs to be taken.